Hello everyone, how are we doing? Are we all ready for the after party?
Yes.
Yeah? We've survived nearly a full day of B-Sides, well done. So, my talk today, I like big bots. We're going to talk about automated threats against web applications, specifically those looking for attacks against business logic. What interested me when I was looking at what to present at B-Sides was, I did a webinar with Scott Helm, who, thank you for not going to see his talk, by the way, it's very kind of you. His ego is big enough already. But I did a joint webinar with him, and we got talking about the bot threats, and he was saying, oh yeah, but we solve this with capture, or we do this with rate limiting. And we started having this conversation. I actually realized that there's a lot of people who make assumptions about the way that these automated threats attack website and build web applications a certain way. And they don't always think about it in terms of the risks to their business that these different types of attack pose. So as a full disclosure, I work for a company called Netasir based in Manchester, and we use a combination of weblog analysis and machine learning to look for automated behavior and help retailers, gambling sites, gaming companies, travel agencies prevent these automated attacks, things like credential stuffing against their websites. So this is a bit of a sort of tour of some of the weird and wonderful things that I've come across in my research over the past few months, and just really a bit of a thought piece around how you can think about these type of attacks. If you are building web applications, if you have a business that runs online and you've maybe seen some fraud or weird behavior going on and trying to work out what's going on, maybe some of the things you can look for, and some of the common stumbling blocks where people will try and put in some sort of mitigation to stop an attack, and actually, depending on what information the attacker is after and how valuable the information within your site is to them, they might then just work around that in a novel way. So we'll start off with, what is a bot? What do people think a bot is? Well, definition there, it's an automated program, autonomous program on a network. So people think about chat bots, about gaming bots and all that kind of thing. But this is specifically just some sort of automated interaction with a website, usually simulating the behavior of a real user. So my research findings, which are obviously skewed because I work for a bot management company, so the people we talk to generally have some form of bot problem, so your mileage may vary. But the websites that I've been looking at, around 53% of the traffic hitting that website, that API, that mobile API, whatever it is a bot. Good, bad, grey, indifferent, doesn't matter, it is a bot. And when we start to work with the clients, of those around 61% of that 53, if you can do the maths, feel free, are unwanted. They don't want them on there. They're just using resource, they're trying to break into things, they're trying to abuse systems, they're trying to conduct nefarious activities. And it's not always just some evil cyber criminal. If we think about the world of retail, it could be a competitor trying to get pricing. There's all sorts of different weird and wonderful things that go on with bots. And what's really quite frightening is when we look at, in retail and travel specifically, when we look at the attempts to log into their sites, 9 out of 10 login attempts of the sites that I've been looking at from March to July have been from automated credential stuffing or account takeover systems. So huge amount of traffic, huge amount of resource going in there to feed things, to give things information back that potentially you don't want. That's not a real customer. That's someone else trying to trick a system. So in simple terms, what do we have? We have a normal user, they have a browser, they make a request to a website. Fairly simple. But what we can do, of course, is we add some script to that, we add some automation. There are various frameworks for doing this. You can use the tools that many of you may have come across to do testing on websites. If you do QA internally in-house, if you build web apps, you probably automate a lot of your testing. Tools like Selenium, all these kind of different things that are out there. So you add in a bit of script and suddenly you can make lots of requests very fast. And that's the basic bot that's out there. Has anyone had any issues with bots? Has anyone come across them? So what kind of bots do you see out there? Anyone? Ticketing, yeah. So that's a great example. The ticketing industry gets a lot of flack for bots. And it's interesting for them because people want to buy tickets to see the new act, but then ticket touts want to be able to buy those very quickly. There's often secondary sites where you can resell those. And the ticketing market's interesting because even the online tickets, the QR code things that you try and do, there's even the people who sell tools for trying to snipe those tickets and buy them up very quickly, also sell tools often for amending the QR code so the detail looks different. So these things where it says you've got to bring ID, this is your name and address, People will sell you for a few £100 a tool that can repurpose those and print out an exactly legitimate looking one for maybe like the O2 in London. And here is your ticket, and we've put on whatever name and address you want, whatever ID, and we've tampered with a QR code to make it look real. So there's some interesting ones with that. Any good bots that people have on their websites? No? Google? Price scrapers? Aggregators? You had your hand up. Was that a bad one you knew of?
Yeah, it's pay-per-click.
Pay-per-click, yeah, so...
Budgets down.
Absolutely. So, you get all sorts of ad fraud things. I'm going to start going through a few of these. Yeah, so you get search engines, you get things like uptime checkers. So, these services you subscribe to say, is my website up? Is it performing? You might have some security scanning tools that fire off to your website and scan it and check if there's any known vulnerabilities, SQL injection, unpatched systems. You might have partner services. So you might work with third parties or business partners who need to get information from your site to resell your goods or services. So they might be using automated tools to go and query an API or even just scraping your website. Aggregators, price comparison, a lot of these things when we go on and we want to see what's the cheapest price we can get for something, they're constantly scraping sites looking for this information. So as a retailer, you might want to be on these, you might not. So this is the interesting thing with bots, that you can't always just say, this is a list of the ones I want, this is a list of the ones that are good and bad, because what's good to one business might be bad to another. And then on the bad bot side of things like spinner bots, and these are kind of interesting. This is the idea of inventory hoarding. If you're interested in this, I'll put a link to OWASP do some things around automated attacks and the interesting things that can happen. But things like spinner bots are interesting because an attacker builds a bot. Well, I say an attacker. A lot of this stuff is a grey area. A lot of this stuff is legal because you can scrape websites, you can do things. But if you've registered for this event today, you went through Eventbrite, you put a ticket in a basket, you have to wait about 20 minutes, you have to check it out within about 20 minutes. The reason they have to put 20-minute wait times on it is someone will see an event, or they will see a product, or they will see a ticket for a flight. They will put it in a basket, hold it there, keep it in the basket whilst they're trying to resell it on another site. They'll only go through the checkout process once they've resold it on the other site for a profit. That could be quite a small margin. They could be making £1 per transaction. But this causes you a problem because you're trying to sell an airline ticket and it looks like all your inventory is exhausted because it's in people's baskets. You can't have 10 people check out the same seat on a flight at the same time, so you have to hold it for a period of time. But these bots are constantly trying to recycle this. Same with ticketing. You might add a ticket for an event. There's a flash sale. You manage to get 100 of them in the queue with different IP addresses or something. You hold them there, you sell them on a third-party site. As soon as you've sold them, you check them out. So from your point of view, there's no risk because you're only buying it once you've sold it for a profit. And of course, you can scale that, with the cloud, with all these different resources that are out there very quickly. But as the person trying to sell tickets or trying to sell airline tickets or whatever it is, your inventory can become exhausted. Same with shopping and retailing. There have been cases where retailers have actually used this against the competition to make it look like the competition don't have certain hot items in stock because they're sticking them all in baskets, making them very hard for you as a customer to go and buy them legitimately. So bots make the internet really unfair for real people a lot of the time. And of course, as soon as you stick up a website, you start seeing bots, whether you want them or not. They're just constantly scraping the internet a lot of the time. Content harvesting. I don't know if anyone's come across this, but this is a big one. If you write quality content, a blog, a newspaper, something like that, quite often people will come along. There's a big setup in China for this where they will scrape sites. They'll put them up on a very similar looking news site and they'll just have adverts on the side. So they're making money off presenting your content, perhaps gated content. They might buy one account and then stick it up there. So if you're a newspaper with premium content, steal your articles, stick them up. So as soon as someone's searching for a hot topic, you're throwing money at me. Someone's searching for a hot topic, it comes up, you go on there, they're getting money off the advertising revenue. So it's your intellectual property, it's your stuff that's being scraped and put on somewhere else. Ticketing bots, we've kind of talked about. Account takeover is probably the one that most people have seen in the news of late. This idea of credentials online, people constantly reuse usernames and passwords. So we'll take those, we'll stick them against different sites and use them to access goods, services, personal information. I'll go into those a little bit more in a second, but there are so many different variants of account takeover bots. It's just crazy. Some are broad brush, tagged in lots of different sites. Some are built specifically for high value goods and services. Scraping, just getting pricing information. Sneakerbox. So until I started at Netasia, I'd never come across these. Has anyone come across Sneakerbox? Yeah? You see, you're a stylish kind of guy. You've got the hat, you've got the glasses. This is the thing with Sneakerbox. People have these high-value trainers that they go after, these limited releases, all these kind of different things that go on. And this was a world that I'd never come across before. But there's huge amounts of money to be made in them. People trade them like commodities on the stock exchange. So there's a huge amount of tools, all of which seem to be developed in C# for some reason. No idea why. I don't know what it is about .NET developers and trainers. But you see all these things, and they're going after. So if you're a website selling some trainers, and you're going to make a few quid on selling them, that's great. And you obviously want them to be sold out. The problem is, a few teenagers in their bedrooms are basically firing a botnet at you to try and buy them before anyone else. So instead of a few customers refreshing a page, you have one 15-year-old in a bedroom with a tool they've bought, firing thousands and thousands of requests. You're under a DDoS attack. If you're on some sort of shared hosting or platform, which a lot of retailers are, Shopify and things like that, you can cause a major problem to them and other retailers. So although it's great that they sell out of things quickly, just because a teenager wants a pair of trainers, I'm saying teenagers, it could be anyone to be fair, but they are phenomenally ugly trainers, some of these things. They're going after them at such a great rate. There's this volume of traffic hitting your site. And how do you tell what's real and what's not? And there are various checks people try and put in place. But especially in retail, you don't want to do anything that slows down that user journey, that makes it harder for someone to check out because they'll just go somewhere else a lot of the time. Account creators. So again, this is often related to Sneakerbox, but a lot of websites offer limited releases, or they'll offer raffles, or they'll offer something like that where by creating more accounts, you have an advantage. So again, people automate this. And if you look, there's lots of things online like Better Nikebot and all these other services and software that's out there that is designed for automating this process of creating lots of fake accounts to maximize your chance of copying some new kicks. I use the air quotes because I don't feel comfortable saying that. Carding is another interesting one. Stolen credit card details. You have a small website and you're selling some legitimate small goods. You're crafting something, some nice paintings or something like that. But you have the page where someone can enter card details. Attackers search the internet for these. So as a retailer, if you have a way that people can get to add a new card to their account page very easily, people will use this to verify dumps of stolen credit card data. Or, even worse for you, is when they don't know the full credit card details. So they know the number, they know the expiry date, but they don't know the CVV code on the back. Well, it's 3 digits. Let's have a bot crack that for us. Fire it. When it comes up with valid card details, great, that one works. So that's a huge problem to you because not only is your website being DDoSed, but your card payment provider might get very annoyed that you're being used as part of fraudulent transactions that they can link you to. Or maybe you're a retailer and when they validate that the card is real, they then use that to buy gift cards or something else. And then you get chargebacks of fraud. Your card payment provider gets very annoyed. They fine you. And when you come to renew, suddenly your cost of processing card transactions skyrockets. So just because you've added the basic functionality in the modern age of being able to buy something online using a credit card, you're being attacked. And if we look at the businesses that are out there that have hit the news in the past year or so around this, there's a really weird mix of companies out here. This isn't just banks, which people often assume. This isn't just high-value assets. Dunkin' Donuts has been hit twice in the past year. Ready for it? Even as a donut company, they can't sugarcoat that one. Oh, swing and a miss. OK Cupid, TurboTax, Deliveroo, all sorts of weird and wonderful companies out there. If you've seen Deliveroo, Just Eat, there's been a lot of things where people have been using credentials to log in someone's account, then saying this food was terrible, I want a refund, getting the refund, then using that to do an order. Or if they've got credit card details stored, maybe ordering food. So there's been all these things where someone was buying, there's a great one where someone was complaining that someone has broken into my account and they had all they could do was buy cigarettes and beer from Nisa or something like that on one of these delivery services. And they were complaining that the attacker had no taste whatsoever. But it's weird and wonderful things like this. And again, as a security professional, we might just be sat here screaming, going two-factor authentication or something like that, or capture or things like that. But again, these people operate in a very competitive marketplace. Anything they do that disrupts the user journey means that they'll go to Uber Eats or someone else. It becomes quite difficult. HSBC is obvious. Nest was a funny one. You see, these companies have hit the news saying they've been hacked. And you often see this carding hack, carding attack, all these things, account takeover. And there's often the word hack involved and breach. And these companies, who effectively have suffered the wrath of a user using password 123 and the same email they've used for everything, are suddenly being introduced into the news, into the media, as being breached and attacked. And you kind of think, well, maybe that's a bit unfair, but it's huge PR damage. Nest was an interesting one. There was a case where someone had claimed that Nest had clearly been hacked and breached, and actually this lady had just used her normal username and password that she used for everything else. And some person had thought it was very funny to log into her account and start yelling at her through the cameras that there was a missile strike coming into San Francisco. And she panicked and threatened to sue Nest, and all this kind of weird and wonderful stuff happens, reputational damage, just because they've used a rubbish password. Spotify, really cool example, streaming services, all these kind of things. They're an interesting one because they're kind of a two-pronged problem. One part of the problem is that these accounts hold value. Especially, anyone got a Spotify family account? Yeah? One person, a few people? I bet you don't use all of the allotted slots. Is it 6 you get, I think, with a Spotify family account? So usually people have empty slots. If you've used the same password for anything else, have a look when you get home and log in and see if those have been sold. Usually we can find at least one person who's had that happen to them, sometimes several times. True story, friend of mine had it happen to them. They got their other accounts and their Spotify family thing sold on. Some attacker then got greedy and actually sold on their master account, the main account that was associated with it. Smart speakers play music, and even if you're on a remote device, you can take over control of playlists. So they're at home listening to music, suddenly Cradle of Filth comes on. If you've not heard of the band Cradle of Filth, do not Google it. But then you end up in this weird DJ battle with someone trying to listen to things. Someone I work with currently, she found out her account had been hacked for a streaming service because every time she logged in, the language had been changed to Spanish. And someone was watching streaming videos using her account. So, weird and wonderful things like that. The second problem, and this was covered at DEF CON this year, and it's really interesting, is what happens when you ring up the bank and start doing the security verification? One of the questions they tend to ask you is, what's a recent charge that's gone out of your account? So if you can take someone's username and password that they use for everything, find a few accounts that they use, get access to them. You don't need to do anything with them other than say, I know $9.99 goes out on the 26th of the month, so when I ring up their bank and pretend to be them, I can give you this list of all these services, all these payments that are going out. You can see the last 4 digits of the account it was associated with. You can start to use these as basically free intelligence source. So you can build up a picture of someone starting just with a compromised username and password, throw it at a lot of online services, something's bound to stick, and then you can start to get their home address, their date of birth, recent financial transactions, all this kind of thing. Some of the examples up there, Transport for London took down their services earlier. Was it last month, I think it was? It was very recently. In fact, the date's on there, 8th of August. Because they were suffering credential stuffing attack. And they got a lot of grief for this. People saying, well, if you can't handle this and all this kind of thing. But these attacks can be massively volumetric. They're just throwing data at you. So every time there's a new source of, a new dump of credentials out there, it can become a problem for you. And things like software licenses. If you've ever been on these websites or you go on eBay and someone's selling a cheap Office license, sometimes these things can come because an attacker has bought something they can cash out very quickly. They'll break into gaming accounts to get, the loot boxes or whatever it is you've built up in your collection. Online gaming is a very popular competitive thing. There are a lot, and I'm not going to blame teenagers again because that's just mean, but there's a lot of teenagers who are just going online and they want to steal things from other people's accounts. A lot of the time you can't trace where these things have gone to in games, so you steal all their swords and possessions and magic wands, transfer them to your account, job's a good one. And cheese. This is one of the weirdest fraud stories I ever heard, where someone found that there's a cheese wholesaler who was having fake card details processed through their carding system. So basically people were using it to validate stolen card details. Then when they found one that was valid, they tried to order cheese for same-day collection. And if you think about a lot of the things that are out there where you can order something and go and collect it from a physical store, if you can use a stolen credit card or account, go and pick up a TV or a large lump of cheese, we're talking like for restaurants here, walk out, sell it for cash value, then you've made a profit from a username and password you found on the internet. So, there's all these weird things that happen where people are trying to cash out. And initially, when I started at Netisir and started looking into this, I thought, we've all heard of this, it's all on the dark web and these secret marketplaces, and I'll infiltrate them and I'll do all this cool research. And then I found, just by Googling, you can find shops like Braid Shop. This isn't on the dark web. This is a normal website where you can buy and sell stolen accounts. Technically, they'll say it's accounts you don't really need to use, or accounts you don't have, you want to just sell on. But if we start to dig into Parade Shop and look at what they're selling, oh look, Dunkin' Donuts. Wonder why they've had 2 credential stuffing attacks that have resulted in account breaches. And again, you can go and buy loyalty point schemes for Starbucks, Subway, UK and Ireland Subway. So, this isn't an American problem necessarily, but for a fraction of the retail value. So you go on, you can buy some stolen accounts, or some points can be transferred to you. You can go in and buy physical goods in a store at a fraction of the price because they give you a login, username and password that's valid. The other thing is, these aren't just like fly-by-nights. These are people who've built a business model around this. They offer support. They will say, if it doesn't work for you, we'll give you a replacement within so many, you've got 24 hours to use it. If it's not valid, we'll sort it out for you. Anyone been on holiday this year? Anywhere nice? Yeah? Where was it?
Florida.
Sorry?
Florida.
Florida, lovely. So you could have gone there at a fraction of the price. 30% of retail. And again, this is breaking into point schemes using combinations of usernames and passwords and then reselling those on. And what they do is they hoard point schemes from hundreds or thousands of accounts, so they have a bank of them. And this has really taken uptick since all the Bitcoin instability, where people used to hoard things like Bitcoin. They're quite often now hoarding loyalty points because they can do this so they can buy a flight at the very last minute for you, or a hotel, or a travel package. By the time you've got on the flight, gone off, or you've stayed in the hotel that night, by the time the fraud team picks it up and 2-3 weeks later they realise something's gone on, I'm being told I'm off camera, sorry. By the time they realise something's gone on, you've disappeared. So what happens? Well, someone has to pay for it, so the loyalty point scheme has to pay out for the hotel, and then they have to refund the customer whose account has been stolen, and they get hit twice with it. So it's a really expensive thing to happen if you're running one of these schemes. And there are actually huge amounts of now dark web travel agents. So when we start to look into it, they have fantastic branding. So this is one of my favourites. I always like finding weird dark websites. There used to be one for a ransomware strain that we tracked in our malware labs for a long time, and they had a pumpkin with a Ferrari logo on it, like a pumpkin carriage with a Ferrari logo on it. It was wonderful. Anyway, so Patriarch Travel here, who obviously, with the Russian Orthodox Church and Mercedes and luxury jets and visit all parts of the world. But you start to dig into these things, and they're offering all these things. It's 30% off. You see people talking about, their reputation within this scene, and here we have someone selling loyalty point schemes. And actually what we've noticed is there's more and more entrants to this market, and they're actually driving the price down. So these people are selling accounts at 5% of retail value, point schemes. So they're just giving them away, basically. So you can get access to these loyalty point schemes that you can then use to do all sorts of other things. They'll tell you they have 5,000 feedback reputations. They will give you the credentials. If they don't work, they will sort you some others out. They will guarantee things for you. They are certified. These are people with good reputations on these online services. So it's really quite interesting when you start to dig into this. And they specifically call out that, they're worried about the fluctuations and volatility of Bitcoin when you're paying for these. And it drives that thing. Sneakerbox, which we talked about briefly, so sites like StockX. Now, StockX is interesting, legitimate site, selling goods and services, but you can see they're tracking people's different users' market value. So you have trainers and watches and designer things. There's a company called Supreme, who in my research I discovered they sell a brick, a household brick with the word Supreme down it, and it sells for £100. So, more money than sense maybe, who knows? Maybe I just don't understand these things, but you can go on these, and they have like stock market checkers. So the price of a rare brand of trainers goes up and down, and there's advice on what you should buy. But then the software that you can actually buy for a few £100 usually is kind of interesting that you can use this to automate attacks against, automate buying against different shops. So you put in the size, the type of trainer you want, all that sort of thing, and it sits there constantly polling the site. And as soon as they're available, it tries to buy them, and you give it card details, so it will go through the full checkout process automatically for you. Again, these are built in .NET, and what's interesting is these people who build these software for doing the bots in the higher end of the sneaker bot market do the same tricks that the sneaker retailers do. They try and drive scarcity, so they do limited releases of their software and say this software is sold out. Now, someone who's worked in the software industry, I've never come across software selling out before, but they will tell you on their site, this particular one is one of the more popular ones. Cyber at AIO, it has sold out. This particular software we're looking at sells for nearly $3,000. I've seen people advertising it at, because they're that desperate to be able to automate these processes. And interestingly enough, there's also cloud services designed to support these. So they're doing the same tricks that people doing real-time trading are doing. So they're talking about millisecond advantages. They will tell you their data centers are closest to the data centers of the retailers that you're looking to buy from. So they're talking about millisecond advantages, and then they're running it on a Windows OS. But we won't hold that against them, because .NET and Windows. So it guarantees that all Sneakerbox are supported, because for some reason they're all built for Windows. But then what happens is the retailers fight back, and they try and do weird things to throw the bots off. So they will put fake listings up that say, hey, real human, whatever you do, don't buy these trainers. This isn't real. This is just the left shoe we're selling. Now, the bots don't know this, so they will buy just the left shoe. There's a great thing on Twitter where there's one retailer who got fed up of these bots just buying up, and all the customers complaining they could never buy these limited releases of trainers. So he put up a pair of trainers at $9,999. And guess what? A bot checked it out straight away. He actually just put this up as a placeholder and said, don't buy this. This is the real link here. Interestingly as well, if you look at some of the ways that the sneaker retailers have tried to get around this, obviously they want to sell sneakers, but they want to kind of make it fair for people. And they'll put in things like queuing systems, so you're held in a position in a queue. And some of the bot tools will offer to bypass that queue feed. They know how to put in basically the right PHP or whatever web code to add it straight to a basket and check it straight out. So there's all sorts of clever bypasses that they've started building in. And there's one interview with someone who was in the sneaker bot industry, and these are large organizations now, and these are groups of people, and they do group buys and club together to cop things at retail and all this sort of stuff. And they said, we're at war with Akamai. That was his view. He saw it as a war with the vendor who was trying to do the CDN and the WAF solution to stop them buying trainers as easily. So let's do a little bit of an exercise here. How am I doing for time? We're doing okay. So when I talk to people about how would you become one of these bot herders effectively, how would you start to do this? And when I talk to people in InfoSec, it's often like, well, I'd start by building my own Mirai botnet, and then I'd write this code here, and then I'd be like doing this phishing campaign to gather email, and it gets very complicated very quickly. So a lot of the time people think there's a really huge barrier to entry, that it couldn't just be anyone launching this attack. This is sophisticated attackers. So let's have a look at that. So we'll start off by trying to find ourselves some credentials to use online. We're going to very carefully make sure we haven't selected Google image search, and we're going to Google check my dump. And we're going to find this nice little Twitter bot here, which just trolls Pastebin looking for dumps of credentials. So often attackers will put on samples of larger sets to prove they have good, valid details that you can then use online. So we're just clicking through here, and we're seeing huge amounts of accounts, hundreds and thousands of accounts just being kicked out there online. So we now have a list of credentials that we can start to use. And of course, the big retailers, the banks, people will always be testing that. But if you can think of a niche service or something that's a little bit off the beaten track, you could try them against that, and maybe that's your sweet spot for account takeovers. And if we Google combo lists, the first thing that comes up is a YouTube tutorial on how to get great combo lists, how to sort them out, how to do these things. So, just with a little bit of Googling, we're suddenly getting taught how to start in the world of cybercrime and account takeovers. Now, of course, we don't want to do this from our own IP address. We need some sort of proxy to put the traffic out through. So if we were on, for instance, Sentry MBA, which is one of the common account takeover tools, we maybe go on their forums, and there's people there, again, offering free proxies there just to try out their proxy network they have. Sometimes these are built from malware-infected devices, Internet of Things devices, MikroTik routers. If I come across another MikroTik router, I might cry because they all seem to be infected with something. Or we just find these other proxy lists that are online. So there's plenty of ways for us to very cheaply, in this case freely, become anonymous and have a list of credentials. Now, how do we automate this? How do we put this together? Well, I mentioned Sentry MBA there. That's one of the tools that was very popular. One of the ones I'm finding more interesting at the moment is Sniper. Again, we're not on the dark web for any of this so far. We're just on the plain internet. We go on here. We found that there's this account recovery made simple, a toolkit that specifically says it's for using a technique known as credential stuffing. It has a modern UI. It has Joe's favorite, AngularJS. It has all these, instant customer service. They're always online. It costs $20 in Amazon gift vouchers. You give them $20 of Amazon gift vouchers, you get this tool. Or you go on the Pirate Bay and find a cracked version for free. If you're doing that, use a VM. Loads of them are backdoored with ransomware and all sorts of other nasty stuff. But what's really interesting with these tools is they come pre-configured with templates for popular websites. They also have a community program where if you want to upload your own template for a particular website you found, you can put that on there. And what that does is it basically maps out the input fields and the outputs. So it works out what it needs to stuff the credentials in, and then if the account's valid, what information it needs to pull back out of there. So we see a lot of prominent retailers, a lot of prominent websites on there that we can look at. So I won't go through them all, but it's interesting because some of them you'll see marked up with things like silent fail or silent ban. So these are retailers who are trying to stop accounts. You've been able to see whether you've been successful with your credential stuffing. They're kind of wise to this already and using different techniques. And what you'll notice is if you look through the different configs, all these different things over time, whereas once they were always going after the main website, increasingly they've reverse engineered mobile apps and APIs to go after those. So people are putting all these captures and user behavior stuff on websites and forgetting that they've got a mobile app that talks to an API, and the attackers are just spoofing that user agent and pulling the data out there, validating credentials over there when no one's looking. And if you look at the trends that are out there, PSD2, open banking, we're seeing more and more APIs being opened up where we're seeing our perimeter extend out to third parties who'll be taking those credentials and validating them. And it's really interesting. So if you take this, I'm not going to do a video recording of this, but you basically put in your proxy network, you put in your list of username and passwords, tick the services you want to try and attack there. A lot of those were UK sites, UK retailers. In this case, it's run. It's looked at a video streaming service. It's checked 168 credentials per minute using, 1,000 out of 1,400 proxies. It's had 2 hits, and you'll see where it says capture at the top, it's telling you what those accounts have access to. So it will tell you a points balance if it's a loyalty point scheme or a bank balance, or if it's a streaming service, it will tell you do they have access to the 4K streams or the regular streams or all this kind of thing. So very quickly, you have a list of all the accounts that are compromised that you can then go on and sell. And there's this kind of evolution. This is the stuff that you can find freely and easily on the normal internet from, basic services that you can just buy. But as we go through it, attackers get more and more sophisticated. So that's kind of the lower tier of the market that's out there. And like I say, there's the attack surface that you've got of, when we think about risk, and this is what I'd encourage people to think about, we too often focus on the website. What can we do around our website? And then we've got a mobile app, or a third party builds a mobile app that talks to an API of ours. And we forget that suddenly we can't put our own, user behavioral SDK on there or something else complicated. And then we have an API that some other service talks to. Or then we have some business partners or third parties who talk to our API. So suddenly, you've got a loyalty point scheme that applies out to lots of different businesses. They're all subscribed into the same thing. You're kind of the central point. But each one of those can be used to credential stuff against you. What are they doing to protect the data that you're supposed to be gatekeeping? And, don't need to tell you this, but there's a phenomenal uptick in APIs usage out there. So when we look at defenses, blocking, limiting, this is what a lot of people think about doing. They think about rate limiting or blocking bad user agents. The problem with this is most of the information that people rely on is client-side information, isn't it? User agent, what capabilities it has, it can be spoofed, it can be faked. If you rate limit, I can distribute through a proxy network. So I can start to slide under your rate limiting. If you want to put a capture up, captures are good in specific scenarios where you're protecting like a login or some piece of information like that. But there are capture farms out there, like 2Capture there. 50 cents gets you 1,000 captures solved by a real human being. Takes about 20 to 30 seconds for them to. So you send them out an image and they send you the text back, and your tools, this is built in and automated. So you're automatically cracking captures there. There's the joke there that someone's put up about, congratulations, you've got your page load time down to 100 milliseconds, less than 100 milliseconds, and then you've slapped a capture challenge on there or something like that, which takes the user 30 seconds to solve. So it becomes a problem for you. And then there's the clever stuff, the user behavior, the JavaScript in the browser. So it's checking your mouse trails. It's checking whether it's a real browser. Is it a headless system? All this kind of thing. Problem is, again, you're kind of having to send that to an attacker. They're processing it, reverse engineering it, and spoofing a response back to you. Or they're doing a mechanical Turk, getting real people to move the mouse around. You get a real user valid cookie set for the session, and then they'll just automate the rest. So there's lots of ways around this. And, when we've worked with organizations, one of the things that we've come up against is, we've done all these things and we're still seeing huge volumes of traffic that we don't understand. Well, let's have a look at your system. Well, we've got this list of stuff that we definitely want whitelisted. So we've whitelisted Googlebot. We were advised to do this by this analytics package that said, we wanted to maintain our search engine ranking. They all look all right, don't they? Yeah? If you're looking at logs, you'd see that. You'd see valid user agents. If you Google those, you'd see that that is a valid Googlebot user agent. If you do a whois lookup on the organizations behind those, it's not Google. So this was a particular website we were looking at recently, and they had a huge amount of traffic coming from competitors who were all pretending to be Googlebot, because everything coming from Googlebot was whitelisted. They didn't want to stop Google trolling their site, so they'd done it by a user agent, which can be spoofed. Verifying Googlebot, if you don't know how to do that, you have to do a reverse DNS lookup and see whether that's actually coming from googlebot.com or google.com. Because the really clever attackers will actually try and use Google data centers to send spoofed things out. So when you do that whois lookup, it says this is definitely still Google, but it's not actually Googlebot. It's something using a Googlebot user agent from a Google Cloud data center to appear like Googlebot. So it becomes very, very strange very quickly. And a lot of the tools we have in place when we're thinking about this in terms of IPs and user agents, that's not a very good way for us to think about it when we're looking at business logic attacks like this. A nice example of someone who thought they'd stopped an attack from Russia. It hit a rate limit and they started blocking these Russian data centers. So this spike on the left, this big green one, this was some data centers in Russia. This was a few different IPs, and they basically hit a ceiling and they started blocking off this Russian data center and thought the attack was over. But look what happened after they thought they blocked the attack. The attackers basically had worked out where the ceiling of their rate limiting was from single IPs and then just distributed the attack from multiple geos, all sliding behind an invisible line just to stay under that rate limiting. So they were missing a big chunk of the attack because it suddenly went distributed on them. How do they do tricks like this? Well, one of the cool things that probably not a lot of people have come across is these residential proxy networks. So this one here, 1 hour free test, whitelisted proxies. They guarantee not to be on any threat intelligence, reputation, or feeds. They guarantee to be mobile operators, domestic IPs, for some mysterious reason that they are anonymous without usage logs. Wonder why. And guaranteed to be 100% whitelisted. So you think, well, where on earth are they gathering all these things from? Well, if we start to look at mobile app stores, you can monetize apps. You can stick adverts on them. You can charge people to do them. Or you can add an SDK like MonkeySock's node here, which allows you to monetize your app by sharing a small amount of the user's bandwidth when their battery is above 70%. They are not using their device and they have a decent, stable connection. So you have to warn a user with a little bit in that long terms and conditions, which we all read in great detail, and put a little notice on the Play Store. But then suddenly, your friends and relatives who've downloaded a free app thinking this is a cool game, this is a whatever, are part of a botnet that allows an attacker to come out from their home IP. So if that IP gets blocked, that's going to be a problem, because if you're trying to shop and an attacker's using that to attack the site you're trying to shop on, how do you tell who's good and who's bad? It becomes really tricky. Anyone come across Ola VPN before? Peer-to-peer free VPN service. I think they claim 191 million people worldwide. And there's an interesting case with Ola VPN. Obviously, people might think, well, what's good as an Ola VPN? I'm only going to get one exit at a time. But it's free for a reason. They have a sister company called Illuminati, who then use those and sell those for legitimate legal scraping services. So you can choose a city, you can choose a mobile network, you can choose a great level of detail, and you can use that as your proxy network. So suddenly the things attacking your website aren't coming from some evil Russian data center, or if you've ever dealt with this before, things like DigitalOcean are common offenders. You've got residential domestic connections, mobile networks that people can use. It becomes very hard to stop those attacks. Again, I must stress, Illuminati do say the terms and conditions, it's for legal purposes, for scraping, for competitive intelligence, things like that. So, I'm not saying that they're doing bad things, but it's interesting that these networks exist and people often aren't aware of them. The JavaScript, so again, this is someone said, we've got this behavioral fingerprinting, but we're still seeing bots getting through. And they had some obfuscated Java code on their system. But it's kind of trivial to start putting that into something and reverse engineering it. So we start looking at the code and going, okay, it's checking whether I have real fonts available. What fonts do I have available Is this a real browser? Is this a real user? And of course, once you've worked out what the tells are, you spoof those and send a response back, or you actually just automate with a real browser. So this is another one, Nike Account Generator tool. So this is part of the Sneakerbox things for generating accounts. And you'll look in the descriptions of it, they're talking about the ways that they're using to bypass different systems. So they're doing things like they've discovered by changing the TLS version to 1.1, it bypasses the thing that was blocking them before. And they'll reverse engineer things, and they'll do all sorts of different bits and pieces. And if you actually look at the changelog, they had a takedown request, in this case from Akamai, on the grounds of they'd reverse engineer the JavaScript so they could see the source code. So it wasn't done on a technical thing. It was done on the fact that they'd infringed Akamai's copyright by reverse engineering this JavaScript that validated whether you're a real user or not. And they put that in their tool. So you could see Akamai's script in their source code. You know, this is all online, available for people to see. And it's not just Akamai, of course, you know, things like Cloudflare. There's a library here, and there's a few scraping services out there that recommend you use this if you're going after sites protected by Cloudflare. And they do various different techniques to bypass Cloudflare's anti-bot pages. So it's this constant cat and mouse game that every time someone brings out a new thing, a new way to detect whether it's a bot or a human, these people are constantly looking to reverse engineer it. I'll just wrap up with a couple of other examples that are interesting. So when people think about these kind of account takeover and these kind of attacks that are out there, they often think about just the web logs and what's going on there. But actually, sometimes you can pull in your back-end systems, your account systems. And this was an interesting one where a website had implemented a system where if you had 5 invalid login attempts, they booted you for 5 minutes. You're based on your IP. Another 5, they booted you for 24 hours. And then they found the attackers, you know, for a brief period of time, kind of backing off. But then they came back and they were trying to work out what was going on. And then they looked at the number of new accounts being created because it's free to create a new account. And what the attackers had done is you can almost work out what time zone they're in by the hours that they're doing this, but they're running scripts to create new accounts. So they were trying credential stuff, 4 different combinations of username and password, and then use one that they've created so they know it's valid. That gets you past the hurdle, so you're not going to be blocked. Another 4, one that you know is valid. So you're never going to hit that 5 limit because you're always sticking in every 5th one a valid user account. So again, this is exploiting business logic. This isn't some clever remote code exploit thing. This isn't some unpatched vulnerable system. This is, you've got a business logic process that goes like this. They've worked around it. Another one, so you can look for tells from unusual geolocations and things as well. This was kind of an interesting one. This is quite a large carding attack. So they were testing stolen card details. The big light blue line is the American data centers the attack was being launched out of. But what was interesting was this particular attacker, we got to kind of know quite well because they always use their home connection in Turkey to test the attack. And you can see the little spots here. So at the top, they're doing the sort of basically working out the configuration for their attack, what they need to do, what the valid login page what the card successful login page look like, what the card failed login page looks like, configuring it. They set it going from the large American data center, and every so often you can see the little blip when they log in to check whether, you know, on there and that the configuration is still valid, that they need to tweak anything. But again, there's little things like that where you can start to build a picture of certain attackers and look for other signals in there. So it's not always about looking at the big body of traffic did we have a sudden spike in an unusual geo? Was there something else that we've never seen before appear? And this is why the company I work for tends to use a lot of machine learning techniques, because you can start to tease out some of these patterns relatively easily. So we're still all right for time. Cool. So, summary at the end. Bots require a bit of a different mindset. We often think of security in terms of remote code execution. Have we patched this? Have we got these ports open? You know, are we vulnerable to SQL injection? But actually, with these kind of attacks, they require a bit of a different mindset that you need to be thinking in terms of your business logic processes and actually working out your risk. You know, I've talked about some quite scary attacks, but a lot of these are against retailers or things with high values behind them, loyalty point schemes, streaming services, things like that. So if your company has a web app or a service, think about, you know, you might not be as at risk. It might be perfectly acceptable for you to do some rate limiting, some capturing, some filtering of user agents, but just be aware of if you suddenly have some other value there that attacker might want to get to, that might evolve very quickly. And building defenses into the app is actually better. So you see some of the things that the people fighting Sneakerbox are doing. It's actually better to make an attacker think they've logged in successfully when they haven't, Because the problem is, if you start playing block by IP or user agent with these guys, or girls, then you end up in a game of whack-a-mole, and what you can end up is almost DDoSing yourself, because they can just keep scaling. Whereas if you feed them false information, if you redirect them to a page with some junk information, if you build it into like a honeypot system, if you automatically just trigger a password reset if you think an account has been compromised, then the attacker is in trouble, because when they try and resell that account and it's their reputation that's damaged, and they'll just go after someone else. There's plenty of other low-hanging fruit out there for them. So it's not always about just playing block at the IP level, block at the user agent level, block at the data center level. It's often about building these processes into your account management systems. Client signals can and will always be spoofed, so you can't rely on that data. It can be useful for the less sophisticated attacks. You wouldn't believe the number of things where you look at the user agent and it just says Python requests. That's probably not a real user with a real browser, is it? That kind of level of detail. And the other thing is, often these risks fall between the cracks in organizations. The marketing team seems that their marketing budget they have spent on that new email blast that's gone out, to launch this new product isn't doing quite the things they want. Their analytics are skewed, that their ops team are complaining that, you've got all these hosting costs that you're having to scale up all the time. There's all these different things. Security team are seeing accounts being breached. A fraud team somewhere are complaining that customers' accounts are being hacked. It can spread across an organization, and there's no one clear defined owner. And actually stopping automated threats is a benefit to the whole business. So if you look at the things by Forrester and other people recently, it's really important to start thinking about who owns this problem in your organization and doing that threat modeling. If you haven't ever had a look at it, OWASP Automated Threat Handbook has some really good starters on how you can start to look at these threats, validate whether you have them, build them into your design process. So that's really worth a look. Other than that, that's everything from me. Thank you. 5-10 minutes. Has anyone got any questions? Yes.
Thanks for the talk, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good, yeah.
I was just thinking about this mitigation techniques and stuff like that. Is there any cryptography like HMAX or anything like that? You say like feeding the bot the false data where they have to solve the human puzzles.
Yeah, so.
Is it that prevents HMAX? Is there any
yeah.
advanced mitigation techniques?
So the trick is a lot. So the question is, can you do anything with like encryption or something like that to make them, presumably like a mathematical puzzle effectively for them to solve that you could, yeah. So some vendors do that. We actually do something like that at our company occasionally. You do like a proof of work to check whether they have valid JavaScript, get it to, do a calculation and come up with a number. And again, it's part of that technique of not blocking the attacker necessarily, but consuming their resources. The problem is you tend to consume real users' resources as well a little bit. And attackers, if they're determined enough, can just run those things and do them. But yeah, it's not a bad deterrent, some sort of proof of work. You filter out the low-level stuff, the headless stuff that can't run JavaScript, the things that can just do some basic simulation. So you can do that. If you look at some of the techniques that people have also used is people will look at the cipher suites that are presented and see if they match up to the user agent, things like that. So just while you mentioned encryption, that you can do things like that. Some of the bigger CDN vendors often do that. So when you're doing that initial handshake, does this details match up? This user's saying that they're on Internet Explorer, but they're on an iPhone and things like that. We come across that occasionally where people really don't understand user agent strings. So yeah, you can do things like that. It's generally about what you can do to consume an attacker's resources and kind of make them go away a little bit. Yeah. So that is valid. So you have a question?
When you were talking about someone asking payment in Amazon vouchers,
yep.
I appreciate that's a bit of an amateur money laundering thing.
Yes.
But is it cryptocurrency almost all the time, or is the Amazon voucher?
It's a mix, yeah. It's gift cards, loyalty points. It depends on who's doing it. There's all sorts of different weird and wonderful payment schemes that they take. You even see some that are basically like, we'll do this for you, and it's like a percentage thing. With the Sneakerbox especially, that they'll operate everything for you. They'll do it as a managed service effectively. You get the sneakers, but you pay them 10% commission, and that's real money and all that kind of thing. But yeah, there does seem to be, in the past year or so, a transition more towards like loyalty point schemes and gift vouchers and things like that they can store, and they hold that they're more stable than the cryptocurrencies a little bit. There's some really weird and wonderful things out there. And you do see, actually, if you start getting into the gaming sector and gambling, people are trying to do things with ARB betting. If you're interested, have a look at Net2See, our website. There's some blogs on ARB betting that one of our data scientists did. And people will use this to basically try and launder money, make it look like gambling winnings, because they're trying to place bets they know they can win, or this bookies has a free bet of this much, and how can I offset that so I can't lose? And all sorts of weird and wonderful things like that, where people are doing strange stuff to generate revenue or hide illegal gains. Yeah. Yep.
Do you see this slowing down and getting away with multi-factor authentication?
Multi-factor authentication does slow down. There have been a few highly sophisticated attacks where people have used things to try and crack phone systems to get codes and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff like that. It's very, very rare. The main problem is that security, it's this security usability thing that, I'm sure people are sick of talking about, but it'd be great if everyone could just jump on board and we'll do multi-factor authentication. But in the world of like retail and, gaming and things like that, you don't want to make users think before they buy the expensive thing that they probably don't need. So it's very hard to implement on some of those systems.
FIDO tokens are super cheap.
Yeah.
Available,
Yeah.
easy to use.
Yeah.
You just see it as like a digital gear carrying around plug-in.
Yeah. The thing I always come back to is, what would my parents do if I presented them with one of those? And I know it would be sat under a coffee cup somewhere. So there is a challenge. I agree that it's getting better. It's not as bad as it used to be. There are a lot less intrusive ways to do these. The biometrics. You can authorize payments with a fingerprint, and all these other wonderful things. Even trying to build fingerprint readers into cards and stuff like that. But it's going to be a long tail problem. There's always going to be people falling behind, I think. So yeah, I'd love to see more of that. And then it becomes the challenge of sometimes with, if it's an API and it's a mobile app or it's a third-party mobile app, where does the boundary lie? Who's responsible for that? And it becomes a little more convoluted sometimes with those sort of supply chain issues. But yeah, multi-factor authentication actually kills a lot of them for the account takeover. For the scraping and, other things, inventory hoarding, again, it solves a specific account-based problem. Yeah. Okay, I'm being given time here, so we'll wrap up, but I'll be sticking around for a little bit if anyone's got any more questions. Thank you very much for coming to see me.